So Mercury is entering Gemini on the 25th, and that is based on my time zone, which is East Coast time, and that is 8:59 p.m. Mercury represents communication, the mind, travel, technology, and Gemini, which is one of the two signs that Mercury rules, the other is Virgo. Gemini is the researcher. It's the information gatherer, loves to learn, loves to teach, loves to speak, loves to chat, loves to gossip, loves to communicate in any and all forms, speech, writing, etc. And Mercury will be in this sign because Mercury moves so quickly. It's actually not for very long. So we can look at the calendar. We're talking about approximately Sunday, and it's only going to be in Gemini until June 8th, and then it's just on to the next one. So it's only a few weeks at a time. So we can feel these shifts in essence based on what we're thinking about, what we're talking about, where our mind is kind of drifting to. It might just be settling into these areas of our chart. So as an example, it could indicate that our thoughts, speech, and writing may actually be on hyperspeed, like Gemini wants to talk, wants to share, wants to write. So we may feel a little bit more inclined to do that, as well as focusing on connecting with others and learning new things. The warning for Mercury in Gemini is not to get overstimulated. So you're like, oh, I want to learn this, I want to know that, I want to talk about this, talk about that, and we're kind of active and going all the time. That's one of the lessons that Gemini always has to learn. It's like, okay, what's a little bit too much? How can I dial it back? So that's what you'll ultimately want to look out for during this next few week period of time. So with this, you can look at 0 to 29 degrees. We're looking at the entire sign of Mercury. And what you'll want to see is, depending on the house system that you're using, do you have one house there? Do you have two houses there? And so we can do the same thing and just talk about some examples of those. So I'll give an example for me to start. For Gemini, in the whole house system, I have the 12th house. So that would mean thinking about, talking about the underbelly of the soul, isolation, kind of some of the spiritual awakening stuff, like really heavy, serious, what's my undoing? How am I self-sabotaging? Those are the kinds of things that I might be talking about and thinking about as Mercury moves through my 12th house. So that's what I mean. That's why I think it really matters what house it's in, because Gemini has its own flavor, just as all the signs have their flavor, the planets have their flavor. But when you know the house or houses, then it really directs where that energy is going. And it makes it a little bit easier to see. It's more identifiable, because if you just say, oh, it's about communication, well, you're like, oh, I talk to people every day, so how do I know? But if it's suddenly things are popping up in this specific area of life, then it makes it a little bit more apparent where it's showing up. So again, Mercury is moving into Gemini on the 25th based on Eastern time, and then it will stay there until June 8th, at which point it will be moving into Cancer. Carry, I'm almost perfectly divided between the 4th and the 5th house. So that'll mean thinking, talking, communicating about family, foundations, caretaking or your caretakers, your family ancestry, history, as well as play, children, creativity, pleasure, dating. So what you could pay attention to, because this is, again, it's such a short period of time, it's only a few weeks. I didn't write it down to look up the exact, or never mind, I can't look up the exact date. You'd have to look up the exact date. So you can look to see what the degree point is. So if you're saying it's almost perfectly divided, you can estimate that it's halfway. So what's the halfway point between the 25th and the 8th? You can estimate or use a tool like AstroSeek to pinpoint the exact date. And then you could pay attention and see, oh, am I actually feeling that shift? Or you can look back at it, in retrospect. If you don't want to have like a placebo effect thing, then you could Maybe write the dates down, tuck them away, go live your life, and then have a reminder for yourself to come back on the 8th or the 9th, and then look back and say, oh yeah, like I did notice that I had this happen in that first half, and then I had that happen in the second half. If you are someone who journals, then it's even easier to look at it because you can have your reflections, or what were you thinking about, what were you preoccupied with. And similarly, if you have any planets, so in my example, I don't have anything in Gemini. If you have any planets in Gemini, that means Mercury is going to be going over it at some point. And that will spark communication or thinking about whatever the energy is of that planet or point. Alexis. So the 5th and the 6th house. So 5th house, I mentioned a little bit before. So that would be the play, pleasure, children, creativity, etc. 6th house is the wellness. So your physical wellness. How are you taking care of yourself? What's your job, as in how are you contributing? What is your work-life balance or service life balance? Pets. So it's considering wellness. Sometimes that can be a little confusing for people. So we have the first house is looking at your physical body, but it's like your appearance. The 6th house is your physical body wellness. And the 8th house is mental health. So they're all subdivided into these different categories. First house with Chiron. Chiron, for anyone not familiar, is an asteroid. It is the wounded healer. It's representing lessons for you to learn in this lifetime, to master. So these are soft spots. It feels sensitive. It feels uncomfortable. It's this thing that keeps happening to you that is just upsetting and frustrating and exhausting. And you can master it. And once you master it, you can help others with it. Having it in the first house, having that in Gemini, is suggesting that some of the teaching, some of the healing, and some of the subsequent teaching has to do with communication with regards to your sense of identity. So how can you speak confidently about who you are, share who you are, teach other people how to figure out who they are? It can also be related to physical appearance. So not 100% the self-worth piece, because that's going a little bit more into the second house, but how people look, being able to talk about it, share about it. So it could be like, body image kind of in a way, but not fully tied to self-confidence. So it's like it's a tough intersection, but so those could be some things that are popping up. So specifically with Mercury going over it, then it's just amplifying it even more. So maybe when it's going over Chiron, you are feeling more confident to talk about those wounds, those things that have hurt you, continue to hurt you, or that you are learning from. Gemini ascending in the second house. So Kim, you're saying that you have your ascendant in the second house in Gemini. So if it's going over the second house, I mentioned that before, that is your money, how you earn money, self-worth, your values, your principles. And then when you have your ascendant in there, that's a major growth point. Your ascendant in part is representing the arc in this life. So things that you are growing towards, you're becoming that, you're embodying that as you progress. So again, it's another similar to Chiron of kind of like a sensitive point in the fundamentals of who you are, but it's within the second house. So it's more about how you're valuing yourself, how you're presenting yourself, how you're representing yourself. And then in relation to all those Gemini themes we've been talking about. Total novice looking for change or not change my work in abundance. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so what you would want to look at, if it's work, if you mean like the work that you're doing, that's 6th house. If you are talking about your career arc, that's 10th house. Abundance, you're going to want to look at Jupiter. So again, there's a lot of different moving parts. Alexis, will this transition make it more difficult to process these things? Um, it depends on your chart. It depends on what activity you have going on in there. It depends on which house or houses Gemini is in. So in the grand scheme, we were talking about what the fifth and the sixth house. So it doesn't necessarily mean that it's more difficult. It means that again, it depends on if you have anything in there. But let's say you have nothing, no planets in there, and there's no aspects that are happening, oppositions or squares. So that's a whole aspecting thing, which is more complex. In the simple terms, Mercury loves to be in Gemini, so it is happy and content to be in there. So things are flowing. You have information coming to you, you have thoughts, you're even more clear in your writing and in your speech in relation to those topics of those houses. So you could be more articulate, and so it's not necessarily making anything difficult. That being said, if you have certain planets that are in Gemini, specifically if you have like Saturn as an example, or they're aspecting, so they're hitting, it's hitting Pluto or something else, then those could make it slightly more challenging. But this is also such a short window. So it's what Bardini was talking about. Like it's so much more complicated. So I try to give people like this is like the level one version, but you can go so many layers deep to say, okay, well, for you in particular, what in your chart would this transit indicate? So on the high level, you can just look at what houses are in there. And if there's any planets in there, I can comment on it. But going more complex is, well, what's it aspecting? So what's happening elsewhere in the chart, not even just in that slice of Gemini, which we're focusing on.